should have been handier with the button. Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal News Hour. I am gonna be honest with y'all. My heart is not in it this week. I'm already ready to go be chill, and I'm going to take a shower after this, and and it's gonna be good. Today was just a struggle. I have just no bandwidth, cannot take any more incoming today, and there was so much incoming, it was insane. And that goes for my life and for the news. I want to remind everyone that you can find me online at CameronJournal.com. Thank you to all my Cameron Journal Plus subscribers. We appreciate you. If you're not subscribed to the Cameron Journal newsletter, head over to CameronJournal.com/newsletter and make sure to sign up for that. If you're signed up for the newsletter, you're going to be getting a couple emails from me here soon about a new AI summit that I am speaking at in September, which is really exciting. It's stressful because it's a pre-tape and I gotta put it in the can tomorrow. I also need to put some other things in the can tomorrow. So tomorrow's gonna be wake up, eat, get dressed, put face on, and record for a while. But it's very exciting. It's a lot of fun. It's my first kind of big speaking engagement. And it's about AI tools, how I use them in my business. The whole summit is about that. So if you're interested, if you're one of my business people who's interested in AI tools and how you're using them for business, then this one is for you. So that's an incentive to sign up for the newsletter so you can find out more. I also want to remind everyone, if you're not signed up for Cameron Journal Plus, you should be, to support my work in this journalism. This is, I talk about it every week, but it's getting quite vital. I'm very fortunate with the Cameron Journal and my other positions and all this sort of thing, but this type of journalism is not easy to do, and I'm here every week, even on the days when I don't want to be, and delivering newsletter and the news and providing value for everybody. So, it's $5 a month, I think $45 for the year. I guess it'll be $6 for the year. But there's a discount, $45 for the year. So if you love this journalism and want to support it, make sure to go sign up to Cameron Journal Plus. You can do that at CameronJournal.com/subscribe. Before we get into the headlines, I also want to run the trailer for the Fantastic Worlds collection, because it's we have our new anthology Soup is coming out is coming out on September 12th, and it's quite exciting. And there's a lot of, I was just communicating with one of the authors today, and you're gonna love this collection. If you love sci-fi, fantasy, you're gonna love this collection. One of the really cool things about this collection is there's a grand tradition in sci-fi and fantasy of being able to get really great stories in short story collections, and a lot of people end up really making their career starting that way. So this is another in a long sort of tradition of really great anthologies in the sci-fi and fantasy space. So before we get into the headlines, I want to run this trailer. Here we go. And the we are still in a pre-order phase for Fantastic Worlds. You can find that pre-order link in the description of this video or over at soupllc.com. We're very excited about that collection coming up. I should run the trailer for America's Lost Generation, which is my book coming out on September 12th, but I can't find it. I was just looking for it right now. I can't find it. I should send away for it. But I couldn't manage to find it. It is out and about. I might need to just go into YouTube and grab it off the publisher site. But yes, and I also want to remind everyone that the Cameron Journal is part of the Soupcast podcast network, and I invite you to watch other shows on the network. If you head over to soupllc.com/soupcast, SOOP you can find other shows on the network. We've just launched a couple new ones. The Writer's Block with Matt Robinson. His first episode is actually with me as a guest, so we'll have that out here in the next couple days. In Defense of Democracy with Anne-Marie Waters, who's a former MP in Great Britain. Her show is now live, and she's kind of getting back into social media ever so slowly and getting back into making videos, and her first episode was really, really fantastic. She also just interviewed her first guest, which is really exciting, so we're looking forward to releasing more episodes with her. And of course, there's old favorites like The Funky Writer with Robert Batista, Created in the Image of God with Wade Franson, Unboxed on Purpose with Barbara Brehan, all great shows, all wonderful things to be interested in. And of course, also The Living Joke, which I do with Will and Connor every Wednesday at 4. So, if you are interested in any of those shows, finding out more about them, subscribing, soupllc.com/soupcast is the place to go for that. All right, so trailer done, housekeeping done, letting you know about everything. Fantastic. Good. Now let's dive into the headlines. So let me do that. And we're not going to start with that story. We're going to start here. And we'll do... Here we go. Here we are. All right, so we're going to start this evening with this interesting post last week from Maddow blog. Now, back in the day, for those of us that are old enough to remember the 2008 election, the Maddow blog was like hot reading back in the day. And they still do it. And this is from... It's actually from a little while ago. It's from August 14th. But I found it last week, and we didn't really get to it. But this whole story begins with, accused of acting like a dictator, Trump offers an unsettling response. Reflecting on critics who've called him a dictator, the president didn't say the accusations were wrong, just that they're irrelevant. At a White House event last week, Donald Trump asked Ilham Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, how long he's been in power. Aliyev, who's long been repeatedly accused by international observers of being a dictator, replied, "It has been 22 years." The American president, clearly impressed, said, 22 years, that's pretty good. At that point, Trump turned to attendees and added, "That means he's tough and smart." It was a timely reminder the Republican doesn't admire dictators despite their despotism. Despite their despotism, he admires them because of their despotism. For those concerned about Trump's authoritarian ambitions, it's obviously been a rough year, but it's also been an especially rough week. In recent days, the American president has militarized the nation's capital, voiced interest in circumventing Congress, again, and exerted control over private businesses, museums, and cultural institutions. At his latest press conference, the Republican addressed the underlying issue responding to dictatorial accusations while commenting on his decision to deploy National Guard troops to D.C. streets and place local police officers under federal control. NBC News reported Trump criticized his political opponents for slamming his decisions to deploy National Guard to D.C. and take over the D.C. police. Already they're saying he's a dictator. Washington, D.C. is going to hell. We've got to stop it, Trump said at the Capitol. So instead of saying he's a dictator, they should say, we're going to join him and make Washington safe, drawing applause from some people in the room. He delivered the comments as if he were baffled as to why anyone would criticize him for pursuing such an inherently noble and worthwhile goal. And there's a video. Shall we watch it? Let's.
We're going to fight crime. That's a good thing. Already they're saying, he's a dictator. The place is going to hell, and we've got to stop it. So instead of saying he's a dictator, they should say, we're going to join him and make Washington safe. But They say, he's a dictator. And then they end up getting mugged, and, but the stats are very bad. But we're going to, I think we'll actually get Democrat support. I really believe.
There's the video. What amazed me about the unscripted and unprompted comment was that he didn't say the accusations were wrong per se, but only the accusations were irrelevant. Instead of insisting that his critics have been unnecessarily alarmist, Trump suggested his critics have missed the point. The president feels the need to improve conditions in D.C. How he chooses to pursue such a goal is far less important than the goal itself. Indeed, he wasn't especially subtle about any of this. Trump believes the nation's capital is going to hell. He believes he and his team have got to stop it, and so it doesn't much matter whether he's acting like a dictator or not. Soon after White House border czar Tom Homan told reporters, President Trump doesn't have a limitation on his authority to make this country safe again. There's no limitation on that. Yeah, sure. No, that's not how that works, though.
This nation on earth.
Is enough for that, or do you think it would need to be
President Trump doesn't have a limitation on his authority to make this country safe again. There's no limitation on that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hellman.
And as this account points out, this is exactly how authoritarian regimes justify abuses of power. Yeah, and history is littered with those examples. Of course, and this is Steve Bannon who's finishing here, of course in this country presidential powers are limited by laws, court rulings, and co-equal branches of government, but to hear Homan tell it, none of these considerations are especially important. Ahead of Election Day 2024, Trump talked about terminating parts of the Constitution that stand in the way of his ambitions and creating a temporary American dictatorship. Months later, the relevance of that rhetoric lingers for increasingly obvious reasons. I would say all of this is quite concerning. I do definitely feel like we're moving in an authoritarian direction. However, I think if people are waiting around for the public to care about any of this and are waiting around for people to hit the streets and complain and think he's gone too far, I think they're going to be very disappointed. I think because most people are quite content with this sort of behavior. And a lot of it comes into the he's doing something ism, which basically is when a society gets to a certain point, when things are dysfunctional, really sort of dysfunctional, it's very easy to, it's very easy for anybody to come along and say, things are bad, I'm going to do something, and never define what that is. Or say something very extreme, and people will nod along and be kind of like, yeah, things are bad, I think we need to take, big action, bold action, and sort of thing. And especially in a political environment where people have been disenchanted with stuff for a while. And this is where I kind of return to the Obama problem, because one of the problems with the Obama administration, Obama came in 2008 promising hope and change, right? And I kind of was suspicious of that at the time, to be honest. And then fast forward 8 years, and we had no hope, and there was very little change outside of the Affordable Care Act. And an ending of drone program and the torture program. We can call those wins. And people were very disenchanted. And part of the reason why Trump was so successful in 2016 is he could come along and say the most crazy, extreme things, and people would go along with it for two reasons. One is I think a lot of people find what he says and does very entertaining, and that he's very funny, and it's good and fun to watch. Most politics is boring and hard, so that was a change. But two, he's willing to do anything. He's willing to do whatever it takes to make things quote-unquote safe. He doesn't care how many, minority groups, poor people, whoever have you that get bulldozed on the way. They are quite content to do whatever it takes to achieve their goals. And the simple reality is that the vast majority of people will not be affected by a lot of these changes. Most people's everyday lives will not be moved or changed because of things that he does. We even's kind of already got a taste of this during COVID. A lot of people's lives were affected by the COVID shutdowns, but many people's lives went on as entirely normal. The pandemic hardly ever happened, especially if you worked in the service industry. You had to go to work anyway. You were never at home. You may have had to wear a mask at work. That was the biggest change. But people's lives, otherwise, by and large, kind of proceeded on as normal. The reality is, the vast majority of people will not be affected by this. I think, especially because he's targeting specific cities, it will mostly be those people in those cities that will feel it the most, especially when there's National Guard posts set up, there's checkpoints, people are getting arrested very quickly, all of those things are happening. That's, what you're going to end up, kind of end up with on the ground. And right now he's starting in DC. He's talking about New York, Chicago, San Francisco, all this sort of thing. And which means the vast majority of the country will never see this in everyday lives. They're not going to be stopped coming out of their neighborhood by a checkpoint. They're not going to have their IDs checked randomly in the road. It's going to be a small minority of people that a lot of the country doesn't even care about anyway. And that, for Trump, that means you can get away with a lot. You can do a lot before people really ever care about it. And the simple fact of the matter is, most people are going to think it's a good idea. Someone's finally doing something. And the lesson about this is, it's not just good enough for someone to quote unquote do something. It's, what are they doing? Is it right? Who's affecting? Who's the second order effects, all this sort of thing. That is a whole other question that, in a democracy, is answered by politicians and people and laws and precedents passed and set over time. In a dictatorship, that decision is made by one person and the whims of one person. And that's a very dangerous place to be in. It also creates this situation where you have a lot of resources answering not to any local officials, but entirely, not even to the federal government, entirely to the White House itself. And that also is a major consolidation of power and a very dangerous move forward. And so when people talk about dictatorship or authoritarianism, in the past, those are sort of pie in the sky. Oh, Trump would ever do that. The liberals are crazy. And now we're starting to see the reality of it. And I think it's really important for people to understand that at a fundamental level. And I feel like this is still lost on most people. And to be very honest with you, a lot of people are going to agree with it. And I'm not necessarily stuck in this narrative from MSNBC that, Trump offers an unsettling response and all this other thing. But I think it should be concerning for everyone that we have a president who views the law as optional. Because here's the reality. Once the law becomes an optional thing, you no longer have protection from it. Anyone. If anything, it then becomes a cudgel bashing you over the head. So, anytime you have a loss of the integrity of law and a law's rules-based society where everyone is accountable to a common standard, when you lose that, and most people really don't know what it's like to live in a society without it, unless you're maybe from a former Soviet bloc country, or grew up in a former Soviet bloc country, or grew up in another dictatorship, or a military junta, a la Brazil, Argentina, Thailand. You don't know what it's like to exist without a protection of law. Most people in this country have no idea what that's like, and not realizing then the government can come collect you anytime they want to. But here's, I think, the dirty little secret about a lot of this stuff. Most people, especially people with a certain skin tone, will be unaffected by any of this. It's the fringe, it's the edge of society that will be most affected by it, and let's face it, most people don't care. They don't. And so I think this is a situation where we could end up sort of slow walking ourselves into a sort of quasi authoritarian dictatorship without anyone really realizing what's happened. And without anyone realizing, we're also in the middle with gerrymandering and laws changes of Republicans structurally locking Democrats out of power for at least the next decade, if not longer. And so it's all setting up now to where you could end up with an authoritarian dictatorship, and now you don't even need Trump to live or run in 2028 because the structure is in place that anyone you elect, a ham sandwich, can then end up being your new authoritarian dictator. This is China's system, fundamentally. And so that would be a characterization of this country and a lifestyle in this country to which we are deeply unfamiliar. And it will have to be very extreme before people start to notice. When, quote unquote, regular ordinary people start getting arrested for stuff they've said online, for stuff they've said in public, for conversations they've had, for texts over phones, things like this, then, and only then, will I think people really start to care. Until then, it's affecting someone else. It's over there. It's out there. And it's hard to get people to care. But I think this is and should be concerning. I'm reminded of in November when I was doing my election coverage, I was afraid of this very scenario and what would happen, especially to people like me who speak out against it. And we're starting to begin to live in that reality. I don't want anyone to be a dictator. Definitely not Trump. I don't want anyone having that type of power. The presidency's had too much power for too many decades anyway. And now we're looking at this major expansion of presidential power that's even beyond the imperial presidency. It's now into people's everyday lives. And I think that is the most frightening of all, but unfortunately will not matter for a long time until it gets really, really bad. And then but by then it will be really too late to change it. Rachel Maddow said something on, I haven't watched today's show because it's Monday, but last week's show, where she said the window for us to stop this is rapidly closing. Like, when a dictator's consolidating power, there's an opportunity to stop that from happening. But given how things are going, it doesn't seem like there's much appetite for that. And I'm going to transition to this clip from Tucker Carlson about monarchy, democracy, this sort of thing. So the post goes that I'll never get the kings to care more about the people than democracy is nonsense. When monarchs lost their grip and people gained political freedom, humanity exploded forward. Wealth, life expectancy, literacy, self-reported happiness all skyrocketed because people were freer. These people think you're stupid and they literally want to send us back to the Dark Ages. Because Tucker Carlson said this: feudalism is so much better than what we have now. Here's the clip.
At some point, when the regime decides, actually, we're against crime, and we do have to have real borders, and, like, I don't know, we care about drugs, and we don't want the society to, like, collapse completely, that's when you'll know they have complete totalitarian control.
Or they recognize that the utility of destroying the country is coming to an end.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Because at that point, they'll feel like, okay, we own this completely, so why wreck it? It's our house now.
Yes, and this is how again, this is the classic principle of actually how you get a king, right? Because they're generationally invested in the well-being of the land they're ruling, the people they're ruling, and they have the power to control the outcomes there. So if you actually care about that, if you're actually going to benefit, why not invest your control in actually producing a better population?
I completely agree. I mean, feudalism is so much better than what we have now because, at least in feudalism, the leader is vested in the prosperity of the people he rules.
Right.
You know, if all your serfs die, you starve.
Yeah, there's a true incentive to care for those people. Now, again, there is also that also exists in a republic if properly managed. But as we've noted, we're well beyond the requirements that even our founders laid out for a functional republican government.
I'm just going to let that sit. So when we look at this idea, and then we're sitting over with Tucker Carlson and this idiot, whoever he is, and people are saying, oh, what we have, feudalism is better than what we have now because, there's someone in charge. There's someone who cares about us. That's not the point of self-governance. Self-governance is us coming together as a community and making decisions that hopefully benefit the whole, or at least the majority. People like Tucker Carlson and this other idiot are purposefully advocating for a more restrictive, less free system because society's going in a direction they don't like and hasn't been for some time. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The GOP did not come up with this in 2016. This has been their agenda, starting with the John Birch Society and the Federalist Society since 1950. Originally, to undo the reforms of the New Deal, which they thought was basically communism. And from then on, we had the 60s and the sex revolution and changes in culture and women going to work and all the things that have happened in the 75 years since 1950. And the agenda of the Republican Party, very openly, by the way, is to not only undo the reforms of the New Deal, which they're starting to do, and the Great Society, but also to undermine the system itself because it no longer excessively privileges one group over another. It no longer is working for the success of certain people. It is, and most importantly, those disenfranchised people feel like they have no control over society and that they've been left behind. And the only thing they can do is burn it all down. There's a couple comments here that I thought were interesting. One says here, that's a mask-off moment. Feudalism is the very system capitalism overthrew. Lords owning land, peasants bound to it, no upward mobility, no property rights, no free trade. The serf worked to sustain his betters, not rise by his own effort. If that's better, it tells you everything. He doesn't want freedom, he wants hierarchy. He doesn't want individuals owning their lives, he wants rulers owning people. Capitalism freed men from their feudal lords. Calling for feudalism is just calling for a different flavor of slavery. Well, yes. And part of that's because they don't want too many uppity brown people. They don't want uppity anyone. Oh, you were born in this position. Great, you get to be high on the hog. You were born in a low position. You get to stay down there. And may it never change. Unless you are deemed worthy. But having this dynamic, fluid society where you sometimes have to listen to people who come from very different places, very different backgrounds from you. Sometimes people get elected who come from a different background than you. That's what they're trying to stop here. I also love this new term woke right, and this person says here, much of the woke right project involves using Marx's idea of false consciousness to try and convince the freest people in the history of the world that they're actually not free at all. The goal is to make people accept woke right tyranny as a preferable option to the tyranny they're already living under. Of course, there have been violations of our liberty over the last few years, and the fight for freedom continues, but none of that comes close to the death, war, misery, tyranny, and poverty these woke right clowns would unleash through their childish hubris if they ever got their way. And I think that sums things up quite quickly. And I did enjoy this comment as well. A Hoppian once told me in a debate that the massive explosion of human flourishing brought on by liberalism and the Enlightenment was just a coincidence. I honestly can't with these people. And this also, these are the tinkies of the right. Spoiled, affluent shitheads who take for granted and feel oppressed by the freedom, affluence, and living conditions that most people around the world dream of, and romanticize actual oppression out of pure childish spite. I think all much of this is a case of when you're used to excessive amounts of privilege, any change in that status becomes oppressive. As I wrote in 2014 in The Death of the White Christian Heteronormative Narrative, as that narrative dies out, and it is dying out, as it dies out, there is going to be backlash. Now, back then I didn't know what form it was going to take. Trump was not on the scene yet. The right movement as it happened is not on the scene yet. The pandemic hadn't happened yet. A lot of things hadn't happened yet. Long time ago. But this is part of that journey. This is part of that conversation. This is part of what we're going through now as a country, is, this sort of backlash of being like, well, someone who looks like us, who has our background, who's like us, so should be in charge so that we can get back into power and be able to change society the way we want it to be, into some imagined past where everything was okay, even though there were problems back then too. Like, people forget the 50s conversations were dominated by improvements in education, universal literacy, rural electrification. This country won a world war, and a third of the country didn't have electricity at home. A lot of people didn't have plumbing. And people kind of forget the tremendous amount of wealth and development that has happened between 1945 and now. And all that time, we have been managed, rightly or not, in a republic with representatives, and things have changed. Society has changed. A lot of this has to do with changing social status. And anytime you have changing social status in a society, that tends to not end well. Social structures change very rarely, and they sometimes involve violence. The old people who want to be on top are going to try to stay on top for as long as possible, and the people who want to be on top are going to do their damnedest to get on top. This is the present situation we find ourselves in. And the reality is, it's not going to take much to start things going in a much more dangerous, much more violent direction. And indeed, one could argue with the protests and whatnot, things already have done. And the last time we did something like this, it lasted for 4 years and killed 500,000 men. It's called the Civil War. Anyway, again, I'm exhausted. It's run into the hour, and we have a couple more news stories to do. So, speaking of authoritarian dictatorships, last week we had this story from queermajority.com called "The U.S. is Becoming Russia," and I loved this picture. I wrote about this in the newsletter, and I actually got AI to do a similar picture to this. And it says here, we're not going to read this whole thing, but the first part is good. The United States once stood as a proud beacon of freedom and opportunity. Now, news stories coming out of the U.S. give me deja vu of the authoritarian country from which I left 7 years ago, Russia. This is by Ayman Eckford. When I read how the American Immigration Service deported without due process Andre Jose Hermano Romero, a 31-year-old gay makeup artist and legal resident who came to the U.S. as an asylum seeker fleeing homophobic and political persecution in Venezuela, it gave me post-Soviet flashbacks. And it's become part of the troubling pattern in 2025. 238 Venezuelans were deported, also without due process, including dozens with active asylum cases. A Canadian actress who came to the U.S. on a work visa was de facto kidnapped by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. A father of two in Maryland with protected legal status was mistakenly deported to a brutal prison in El Salvador. What's more, President Trump has vowed to end birthright citizenship, refuse to return people deported by mistake, and raise the prospect of shipping American citizens to El Salvador's mega prison. It all reminds me of the Russian attacks on Chechen civilians who were sent to concentration camps, or Thailand's forced return of Uyghurs to China to face certain persecution or even death from the Chinese Communist Party. The U.S. now indiscriminately violates the human rights of a particular group of people, or anyone who doesn't look like what the new administration thinks of as an American. Romero was accused by ICE of being a member of the transnational criminal gang, Tren de Aragua, largely because he's Venezuelan and has tattoos. Andrea Santillano, a criminology professor at Central University of Venezuela who spent years studying Tren de Aragua, told The New Yorker, quote, "This is the first time I've ever encountered any reference to the significance of tattoos for Tren de Aragua." Rana Risquez, a Venezuelan journalist whose book on Tren de Aragua is considered definitive, also told the magazine, "The truth is that a tattoo identifying Tren de Aragua does not exist." As one would imagine, Tren de Aragua is not an LGBT-friendly organization. Their hyper-masculine, prison-born culture does not tolerate gay or bi people, and will not accept someone like Andre Romero. It's also unclear what use a criminal syndicate would have for a makeup artist. This information is not hard to find. The Trump administration is simply uninterested in the facts. I once found myself in a situation somewhat similar to Romero. 4 years ago, the Russian politician Evgeny Fedorov threatened a criminal case against me, accusing me of all things of recruiting women to the Islamic State by using feminist ideas. In bringing up such an absurd accusation, he also called me a Ukrainian lesbian. I'm neither a lesbian nor fully Ukrainian by blood, and blamed me for supporting both Islamic terrorism and gay propaganda, which would make me the world's first LGBT activist jihadi. Evgeny Fedorov is a Russian legislator in the ruling United Russia Party and the leader of the far-right National Liberation Movement, which is famous for repeatedly calling for nuclear attacks on the United States, as well as the anti-scientific and anti-American conspiracy theories. So of course he didn't care if that is literally impossible to be an ISIS supporter and be openly queer. The accusation arose from an article I wrote about the war on terror. The piece, which included my own story as well as interviews with Muslim women in Russia and the UK, pointed out that Islam, just like with Christianity and Judaism, is not synonymous with terrorism. The article, combined with the fact that I was an LGBT activist, gave the corrupt authorities all the pretext they needed. I lost all of my Russian LGBT allies after this fake accusation of terrorism. Despite years of collaboration and friendship, most of them were silent because they didn't want to look connected to someone who was blamed for extremism, which in Russia includes LGBT activism by law. At the time, these allegations seemed quite bizarre to my friends in America. Now the U.S. is recreating this Russian playbook. It is extremely clear that the Donald Trump administration used the Tren de Aragua gang to invoke the Alien Enemies Act, a law passed in 1798 that had previously been used just 3 times in American history, all during wartime. Now it's invoked to round up people of South American origin and deport them without trial to a mega prison in El Salvador or to Guantanamo Bay, where detainees and inmates are subjected to violence and humiliation. Andre Romero was sent to the prison without due process, without a removal order, and unbeknownst to his lawyer and to the judge who was awaiting the hearing on his case. This doesn't just arguably violate the Sixth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, but is also extremely cruel and inhumane. El Salvador's prisons are known for their brutality, especially towards LGBT inmates. And that's, I mean, we've read most of it at this point. But the point being is that when it comes to having this go on in society, it should be very concerning to everyone involved that this is going on. And I think what worries me the most is that most people don't care. They think it's a good thing. And they will continue to do so until it comes for them. Now, again, much like the authoritarian dictatorship conversation, this is something that will not affect most people's lives and most people will not care until the economic stagnation kicks in, until the sanctions kick in, until the government isn't responsive to the people's needs, until their friends and family are getting picked up. And for many, it may never come to that point. Many people live in Russia without ever kind of running afoul of the law. But then sometimes things get weird, like keeping people in buses in the cold, which Putin did several years ago to stop protests, I think in 2021 after the pandemic. When it comes to, foolhardy invasions of places, we've already ticked those boxes. But this is not a society you necessarily want to live in when you can be a legal person one day and not the next. With no warning. Or you say something and the wrong person hears it, and all of a sudden now you have a criminal case and can be sent anywhere for any reason. This is not a type of society we should want to live in. And yet, this is what we're becoming. And the fact that other people from other authoritarian regimes are ringing the alarms as we kind of like, hey, this is starting to sound awfully familiar. Hey, this sounds familiar. Should raise everyone's alarm. And if you're one of my business people and you think this doesn't affect you, let me tell you, it is very hard, unless you're in with the right people, to do business in a dictatorship, authoritarian or otherwise. It is very hard to make money. Prices change wildly and rapidly. It's very easy to get bullied out of business or get bought up by a larger competitor. So, unless you're a Fortune 500 CEO, this is still not a good thing for you. And the U.S. prosperity is predicated on free trade and rule of law and a free and open society where people are free to do business and to sell without kickbacks and corruption most of the time and all this sort of thing. You don't get that in authoritarian dictatorship. You get graft. You get paying off officials. You get very difficult things to do business, and it makes it very hard for people to start a business. You end up with social stratification, and which, I mean, I guess according to Tucker Carlson is a good thing. This is not the America that we're all used to living in. And I'm very afraid that people are going to wake up one day and realize, oh, things have changed, and it will be far, far too late. Speaking of that, this was a story I held over from last week. I love the Daily Cost. And this one folds in very gently with my book, America's Lost Generation. It talks about what's happening in Japan and the low desire economy. What it is it happening in the United States, and can it? And it says here, it's hard to imagine an economy built not on ambition, growth, or restless striving, but on something quieter, the decision to want less. That's exactly what seems to be happening in Japan. Faced with a declining and aging population for years now, people there have begun working fewer hours, skipping promotions, living modestly, and often choosing not to marry or have children. To Western economists, this looks like a disaster. To politicians, it's a puzzle. But to the Japanese who are living it, the mood is less catastrophic. They don't always see themselves as the victims of stagnation. Some see themselves as simply opting out of a race that no longer feels worth running. Stop me when any of this starts to sound familiar. The term low desire society was coined by, I'm not going to pronounce that, Ganashi Ome, a Japanese management consultant, and later popularized by analyst Louis Zhao in his video essay Japan's Low Desire Society. Japan, once the poster child for economic dynamism, has been struck in what economists call the lost decades. After its asset bubble burst in the early 1990s, the country entered a long period of deflation and low growth, but what began as an economic slowdown hardened into something deeper, a cultural shift. Young people, watching their parents sacrifice for rewards that never came, began asking whether ambition itself was worth the trouble. Some decided that if the game was rigged, the smartest move was to stop playing. They lived simply, rent instead of buy, save instead of invest. Marriage and parenthood, once the natural arc of adulthood, feel optional, even burdensome. Seen one way, this is resignation. Seen another, it's rebellion. And if you squint a little, you might even see it as wisdom. After all, Buddhism has been saying for 2,500 years that endless desire is the root of suffering. Peace comes not from satisfying every craving, but from letting go. It recalls the famous story of Alexander the Great offering Diogenes anything he desired, only to be told, "Then step aside, you're blocking my sun." Alexander, we're told, was so struck that he declared, "If I were not Alexander, I would be Diogenes." Perhaps Japan, in its own quiet way, is playing the same trick on the modern world. And this is honestly, I love this, article because this is really what America's Lost Generation is about. I really wrote the book being like, the Japanese story sounds so familiar to what happened to millennials and now Gen Z that there's just too many parallels. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. People are opting out of ordinary normal life because it doesn't seem like it's worth it anymore. And oftentimes, especially in this country, you can't afford it. And when you can't afford to live, what comes next? You kind of give up. It says here, if we look more closely, we can already find places in the United States where the low desire economy is not just theory, but reality. Retirement communities from Florida's The Villages to smaller complexes across the country are perhaps the most obvious. Here, people deliberately downsize, prioritize leisure, and measure life not by ambition, but by time with friends, health, and modest pleasures. Retirement itself is a kind of low-desire stage of life, and whole towns are built around it. Rural towns in the Midwest, Appalachia, and the Rust Belt have been living without growth for decades. Population shrinks, storefronts stay vacant, and residents learn to get by with less. For some, this is despair. For others, it's adjustment. Grow food, trade services, value family and community over endless striving. It's not glamorous, but it echoes Japan's long adjustment to low growth. Urban countercultures offer another vision. In Portland, Oregon, Asheville, North Carolina, or Burlington, Vermont, there are communities where ambition is measured not by promotions, but by authenticity. People choose part-time work to support artistic lives, join food co-ops, and bike instead of buy cars. Burlington even experimented with its own local currency, the Burlington bread, to keep value circulating locally. These aren't accidents, they're experiments in living well without living bigger. Then there are the minimalists, tiny home dwellers, van lifers scattered across Colorado, California, and beyond. Their choices aren't born of economic collapse alone, but of a deliberate rejection of debt and consumer pressure. A 200 square foot home isn't a defeat to them, it's liberation. Technology plays an unexpected role as well. Computers, mobile phones, and now AI have made it far easier to live with less while still remaining connected. Remote work means you can no longer need to chase careers in big cities. You can work from a cabin in Montana or a one-bedroom in Des Moines. Smartphones give you access to information, entertainment, and social life without needing to buy much else. Streaming replaces shelves of DVDs and CDs. A single laptop replaces whole libraries, filing cabinets, and offices. And with AI tools now handling tasks from scheduling to coding to writing, it's increasingly possible for individuals to sustain themselves with fewer hours of labor and less material ambition. In other words, the very technologies once assumed to fuel endless consumerism may also be laying the groundwork for a low desire economy. I'm probably going to tweet out a thread about this on Twitter. But this is exactly the cultural changes I was talking about when I first started researching America's Lost Generation. It was right during the pandemic. And I was reading this book called Japanization by a guy named Richard Pasek. And I was shocked because I saw, oh wow, things could definitely take a turn, that we're at the opportunity for that. And in the years it took me to write and release the book, we have fully started to go down this road. And I think this desire of the low desire economy where people just aren't doing stuff. I would say millennials are already there because we're middle age. I'd say Gen Z is not far behind. And this means that much of what we have measured and predicated our growth and improvement on as a society is probably on its way out. And this cultural shift has plagued Japan for decades. They've never fully adjusted to it. And I think it will be much more difficult for our country to adjust to it as well, especially as we're entering into the, this big competition with China, which would require us to do a great deal, and people are just kind of running out of energy. The last story I want to cover is something that I've really only seen on Twitter, so I imagine you probably haven't heard about this one, but let me start from the beginning. So back in December, during the Trump transition, Vivek Ramaswamy made a note that he wanted to do a lot more H1B visas and bring in a lot more smart, brilliant, talented immigrants because Americans were too lazy to do the work and complained too much and all this sort of thing. The H1B immigration system is a system where people are allowed, tied to one employer, to be on a visa, come into this country to work to fulfill specific roles that companies could not find Americans to do. Now, that sounds like a fine program. If you can't find an American to do the job, you can import one from somebody from somewhere else. Seems fine. There's only one question. And people are being like, why can't anyone find a job? Why are experienced people having trouble finding jobs? Well, as it turns out, there's been a lot of corruption in the H-1B visa system. Now, I was already aware of this, but now it's starting to come out, and I'm actually learning kind of actually how they do it and how they get away with it. So, one of the things they do when they say they can't find an American to do the job is they post job postings on these little-known sites. No one applies or no one qualified applies. They then send the specific links to H-1B workers who then apply, and then the H-1B gets the job because they couldn't find anyone else. Here's the thing. The jobs are not being publicly posted in places where Americans are likely to look for them. So they're creating this false idea that there's no one to do the job, and therefore they have to hire an H-1B person. All this has started to come out on X/Twitter now. And this account, Jobs Now, has kind of taken up the banner of posting where these job listings are, having Americans apply to them, and once an American has applied, it then makes the job ineligible for H-1B. It says here, Thank you for so many of you to coming to follow us this week. We are so happy to have the chance to help thousands of more with your job searches. Repeating now, why do we create jobs now? We were tired of seeing companies hire H1Bs for ordinary jobs that Americans could do. When we learned from this other account that employers were systematically discriminating against Americans by hiding jobs for perm applicants in violation of the law, we decided to create our own job board to make it easy and accessible for Americans to apply for hidden permanent jobs. We built custom software that allows us to rapidly process hundreds of perm job postings from across the country and upload them into a modern job board format. And now we are proud to have helped our users apply for over 35,000 jobs at over 1,000 companies. We will always be dedicated to providing access to American jobs for American workers. If you want to go check this out, you'll want to go to jobs.now. And you can see here that there's all these different job postings that they've pulled in that were basically secret jobs that are badly publicized so the H1Bs could get them. And people can apply to them. Also, there is some other websites that are coming out myself. It says if 100,000 Americans were to apply for H-1B jobs in the next 5 minutes, I'll guarantee you that Congress would be walking the halls today instead of in November talking about these Americans. I cannot make a difference by myself. You cannot make a difference by yourself. But all of us working together, we can make a huge difference. And this one is another website. And it's listing all, look at these wages. Look at these wages. $72,000 per year, $40 per hour, $92,000 per hour, $20,000 per year. Are you telling me that you could not find a single person in this entire country to be a business intelligence analyst in Exeter, Pennsylvania for 90 grand? Computer programmer, 8 positions, all at 94,000 a year. Enterprise applications programmer. These people exist. These Americans exist. The point is the H-1B visa system is corrupt, has been corrupt. Companies have been gaming the system. This is as bad at the tech company level as it is the way farming and agricultural companies use illegals in the fields or in meat processing. It's the same thing. It's the same problem. It's the same thing. And I've always said, when it comes to immigration, you will never solve immigration in this country until you get corporate America off the teat of cheap labor. As long as they can find some way to get inexpensive, cheap labor from somewhere else, they will. And they will avoid hiring Americans, if at all possible. And this now is finally all being exposed for the dishonest system that it is. And it's just getting worse and worse. But here's the great thing, is as more and more people apply, and there was actually a brigade of people that started applying for these things, even if they weren't even qualified for them, sort of thing, just started applying for them in order to make them ineligible for H-1B jobs. It's all coming out now. It's all right here. All coming out now. You know, and we're living in a broken job market anyway, but the fact that these companies are gaming the system to get cheaper H-1Bs that they don't have to answer to, that can't complain because they're tied to one employer, all this type of thing is absolutely, it's beyond the pale. It's beyond disgusting. It is the problem. So much of our system comes back to good old-fashioned corporate greed. And the H-1B system is one of them. But I wanted to highlight it because I think I've not seen any really real reporting about it. I've not seen anyone else talking about it, and I wanted to highlight it. So, yeah. So that's the news this week. Very frightening stuff. We did cover some other news stories in the newsletter this weekend. Which included, what even did we include in the newsletter this weekend? We included all kinds of stuff. We included, it was A War for Culture was the title this weekend. And we included some really great stories, including how the right has maybe finally won the culture war, which was fun. A couple weird cases from Trump, including the judge that ordered the alligator Alcatraz closed and removed within 60 days. The Supreme Court decision that allowed them to cancel a bunch of NIH grants studying DEI. And then we also had a story about Adam Schiff getting investigated, mostly for his participation in the first impeachment. So again, if you're not signed up to the newsletter, you're not getting this delivered directly to your inbox, including personal updates from me. Also, there's officially a famine in Gaza. I covered that story as well. We had great fun with it all. So, and you also get, look at all this other stuff you get. A new appearance from me delivered to you. New article delivered to you. Plus, interviews, the news hour, and my other podcast. So, be signed up for the newsletter. You'll want to be signed up for it. That I promise you. It's a lot of fun. A lot of great things happening. And it's delivered right into your inbox. So, that's all for me, though. My name is Cameron Cowan. You can find me online at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, at Cameron Journal on TikTok and YouTube, facebook.com/Cameron L. Cowan if you're on Facebook. So, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a great night. I'll see you next week. And I'll see you on Wednesday for the Living Joke podcast, and I'll see you next Monday for the News Hour. Today's interview is actually blockchain and crypto with Eric Guthrie. He's a lawyer who talks about blockchain and crypto, so make sure to check that out. And there'll be a new interview on Friday, too. All right, now. Talk soon now. Bye-bye.